Okay, let's get some perspective right now. Joining me as well is criminal defense attorney Peter Hoffman. Peter, I haven't had a chance to get your reaction to the verdict today of guilty across the board from Nouman Raja. What do you make of it?
Not surprised. I thought about this over the last week because we were on together last Tuesday or last Thursday, whenever it was. And I don't think there's a week that goes by if I'm not looking at the TV news where there is a police shooting either of an armed or an unarmed African-American male. And I think that all of us, including the jurors, and that's what counts. It's not what you think or I think or some other lawyer who's pontificating thinks. It's what the real people who are on that box think and what their life experience is. And as much as they're going to take the oath and agree to follow the facts and the law, they bring their life experiences in. And I thought that I did listen this morning or watched some of the defense closing, and I did see some of the prosecutor's closing, which was certainly more emotional than the defense closing. And, you know, I understand the verdict. Am I surprised? Not particularly. Do I think it might have gone the other way? Perhaps, but, you know, it didn't.
Right. And again, it's very interesting from a lot of different angles, both from a legal perspective and also trying to just cover these cases in general, these officer-related shootings, and see where it fits into it. We're going to play more of the closings in case you missed it, because this is the last thing the jury heard from the attorneys before they ultimately rendered the decision. So let's keep going on with the prosecution's closing argument, and a little bit later we're going to play you the defenses. Let's keep going.
There really are no words. How do you go from, are you okay? Hey man, can I help you? Which is what he claims he said. To get your, and pardon my language, I'm going to say what he says, not how I normally speak. Get your fucking hands up. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. What did Corey do? Think back to his walkthrough statement. What he told law enforcement happened when he got there. What did he say? Because this is where the recklessness is. Like I told you, manslaughter is different. He pulls up. He's in an unmarked vehicle. He gets out of the van. He says, well, I got out of the van because I thought it was an abandoned vehicle, but when I pulled up, the door popped open. So then he stops his vehicle. Well, the door popped open. So if the door popped open, then why didn't you just grab your vest? And you guys have seen photos. I'll show you again. You guys have seen photos of where the vest was, just lying down there on the floor, as though he didn't need it. Between what we know is the defendant's voice and the point where Corey Jones says, huh. So those 6.3 seconds, how about you pull out your badge? Why don't you pull out your wallet badge? You've already done everything wrong from the jump. Everything. From the time he was supposed to be headed to the Lux, think back through his walkthrough, he said that he was headed to the Lux because he heard over the radio that there was a disturbance at the Lux. And he had the riot gear in the back of the vehicle. Sergeant Anderson said over the radio, hey, I need some officers. He was headed there. What does he do? It was this young man's unfortunate fate that as he's driving eastbound on PGA, he looks over to his left and he sees Corey Jones's car stranded.
Philip, I noticed you, as you were watching the closing arguments here from the prosecution, you said they made a really effective point, or they did something that was very effective. Do you mind sharing that with the viewers?
Putting Corey's picture up there with that smile. You know, when Peter came on, he mentioned a large part about how, yeah, weekly, bless you.
Thank you.
Weekly, we're dealing with, you know, some officer-involved shooting involving, you know, generally young black men. As a young black man, I typically, when these matters happen, am always waiting for how is this black man that got shot going to be vilified? What are they going to pull out in terms of his criminal record? What bad picture are they going to go and find of him wearing a hoodie or just some way in which he can be vilified? With respect to Corey, this particular prosecutor did an amazing job of selecting the right photo. As you said, the gun was always on safety. Corey never in any way attempted to assault that guy that night. The facts were always on his side. But just in case anybody wanted to try to vilify him, that picture, I think, cut right away at that. That smile was as bright as day.
And Peter, let me ask you, as Philip says, where does this case fit into other kinds of officer-related shootings? It is very different from other ones that we've covered.
I think there's some common threads in all of these shootings. This one in particular, I guess that's not a common thread, is everything happened so fast. I think that I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I understand human nature. And I think that in a situation like this, at 3 o'clock in the morning, Corey is scared to death. And I think when a policeman comes up and he's confronted with somebody getting out of the car and he describes a gun, that's what he describes, everybody's afraid. And when people are afraid and things happen quickly, bad things can happen more times than not. And I think that's a common thread in a lot of these shootings.
Yeah.
I've been involved in situations where I talk to officers afterwards and they don't want to say it, but they'll say it to me. They were scared to death.
And I'm sure, and I don't think there's any doubt that Raja was scared. And I think in his police interview afterward, he clearly was excited and scared, but clearly the jury was not on his side today. Let's take a break. When we come back, we have a lot more to analyze in this case. We'll be right back.
I'm Dan Abrams, and this is the Law&Crime Network.
His body just went boom.
She did it! We've been covering 2 trials of course.
The only 24/7 network with expert legal analysis and gavel-to-gavel live trial coverage.
He kissed me goodbye on the cheek. That was the last time we saw him.
From high-profile cases to the most compelling local trials.
You didn't expect. Let me finish.
We cover the most interesting and important legal news going on across the country.
A verdict in the case of an Ohio woman who took the stand and admitted she shot and killed her military husband.
And our multi-platform brand is resonating. From syndication...
With more, we're joined by Law&Crime Network host Jesse Weber.
...to our expert analysis.
With me now is Rachel Stockman, editor-in-chief for Law&Crime Network.
This former head prosecutor, criminal defense attorney, and host of Law&Crime Network, Bob Bianchi.
On Monday, the Law&Crime Network covering the trial live.
Let's get to the top legal stories of the day with Jesse Weber, attorney and anchor for the Law&Crime Network. So good morning, Jesse.
With dozens of places to watch, we already have tens of millions of minutes viewed per month. And our viewers and readers are engaged, with more than 30,000 comments per month on the site, a bustling chat room, and an average watch time of 30 minutes.
Womanizer, that's fine. It doesn't make me guilty of solicitation of capital murder.
This is Law&Crime.
We got a lot of fascinating cases, as we always do, gavel-to-gavel coverage.
In the fastest growing genre in America, we are uniquely positioned to dominate. This is Law&Crime.
Where are you headed?
Just gonna hang out.
If any of your buddies ever pressure you to take a drink, just tell them you promised your dad you wouldn't.
I promise. Love you too, Dad.
They really do hear you. For tips on what to say, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
Our son Arjun was born with cystic fibrosis. CF is a genetic disease that shortens lives. When the foundation was founded in 1955, children with CF rarely live long enough to attend kindergarten. Today, thanks to the foundation's groundbreaking research, advocacy, and care, some people with CF are attending college, getting married, and starting families. We've made amazing progress, but until a cure is found for all people with CF, we will not stop. Help us add tomorrows. Visit cff.org today.
Matthew.
I know that a lot of times, Mom, it might not seem like I'm listening to you, but I am. And what you say really does matter to me.
All the talks we've had over the years, including what you've told me about not using alcohol and other drugs, they stick with me, and they make a difference, especially at times that matter most.
Hey, want a drink?
No thanks, I'm good. So thank you, Dad, for preparing me for what's ahead.
Talk. They hear you.
Welcome back, everybody. We're still breaking down the verdict from this morning in the Nouman Raja trial. The former officer was found guilty of manslaughter and attempted first-degree murder with a firearm, and he could face life in prison when he's ultimately sentenced on April 26th. So we're breaking down everything that happened, trying to understand how the jury reached their verdict. What we're playing you right now is what happened yesterday. We played you a little bit of the prosecution's closing argument. Let's finish it up right now. And this is where they get into the point about how Raja had multiple opportunities to properly identify himself as a police officer. And if he did that, it might have been a totally different situation. Watch.
This man had multiple opportunities to make himself known as a police officer. As a matter of fact, when he pulled up and he saw that car door pop open and he realized that it was not abandoned, guess what he could have done? He could have continued to drive on. He could have continued to head where he was going, which was supposed to be to the Lux to assist his fellow officers. When he realized that the car was occupied, he could have continued to move on, but he didn't. So he had every opportunity to avoid what happened, and he didn't. And he needs to be held accountable for that. I don't care if he is a police officer, if he was a police officer at the time. It's just like any profession, whether it's a lawyer, doctor, when you make wrong decisions, I don't care what you do, when you make wrong decisions, you don't get a pass. What you get is to be held accountable. And that's what we're asking you guys to do here today. Don't give him a pass because he was a law enforcement officer at the time. This is where the reckless behavior is. This is where the course of conduct that he knew or should have known was going to lead to Corey's death. Now, did Corey have a gun? Yeah, he did. He did have a gun. Legally, rightfully, he did. But did he have it pointed at the defendant? And that's the question. Did he ever have that gun pointed at the defendant that would have justified the defendant shooting him? And the answer to that, ladies and gentlemen, is no. By this defendant's own words. When I directed your attention to Corey saying, hold on, the reason why that's so important, as I said before, is because it shows that the defendant is the aggressor. The defendant is the person who is provoking this.
Okay, so Philip, what do you make of the prosecution's closing argument here? I mean, it seems to be filled with passion.
She believes it. You know, there are cases, Jesse, where you're litigating and, you know, we're trained as lawyers. You go in, you argue the evidence, you argue it passionately. You may not necessarily believe and feel in what it is that you're arguing, but you're doing your job. This woman is doing her job, and she believes, you know, ultimately what it is that she is telling that juror. She's talking in a way as if she is at, like if she's at church or, you know, sometimes like I'll go to black lawyers' functions and we'll talk about some of these matters that are going on in the news with these shootings. She's talking like she's at one of those functions to us, as opposed to just like litigating. But she's doing both. They're not mutually exclusive.
And it's pretty strong. I want to play now the defense's closing argument, and you can see the difference in style. Take a look.
You know that the Jones family will never, ever get over what happened that early morning. A life lost forever, simply awful. But what happened at 3:15 in the morning was not a crime. What happened on the off-ramp was not a crime. As terrible as it might sound, it was not illegal for Officer Raja to do what he did. He didn't leave home that night thinking, Who can I kill? How can I commit murder? Who can I hurt tonight? He left home that night to go to work on the midnight shift with the thought in his mind of doing good as a police officer, to serve and to protect. He didn't leave home that night trying to hurt anybody or to be involved in a horrible, horrible turn of events that began when Corey Jones pulled a gun and aimed it at Officer Raj's head. Let's be very clear about it, emotion aside. Corey Jones took out a gun and aimed it at Officer Raj's head, and everything changed. You couldn't take that back. There's nothing that could be done after that. That was an aggravated assault. That was the use of deadly force. You can't negotiate with a gun pointed at your head. Now I'm going to say something right up front. I'm going to get it out of the way, and I'm going to say it. This case, as the judge has told you, has to be decided on the facts and not on emotions. It's very emotional. It's terribly emotional. But it's not about emotions, it's about evidence. And it's not about race either. And I have to say it right up front. The first subject matter in the prosecutor's voir dire was about racial killings. 65 seconds into Mr. Fernandez's opening statement, he talked about how a man was killed that night, undeniably a black man. That's not what this case is about. There was a human being killed that night, and the question is, was it a crime or was it a horrible accident and a horrible tragedy?
Okay, that's Richard Lubin, one of the defense attorneys for Nouman Raja, delivering the closing, different from Scott Richardson, who provided the opening. And Peter, you had talked to me a little bit about the difference in style and all that. I just want to start right now from one of the things he said. You know, the idea that Jones aimed his weapon at Raja, I mean, how do we know that, Peter? The only way we know that is from Raja's testimony. I mean, from Raja's statement of offense, right? Am I missing something?
No testimony. All we have is that walkthrough. In the opening that the defense gave, and I remember this vividly because I wrote it down, he said that Corey pointed the gun twice at Raja. And, you know, when you give an opening, jurors hear everything, and they remember everything. And that's something, if I were on the jury, I would have remembered. If I were the DA, I would have remembered that. And there was no way that that was going to be substantiated unless Raja took the stand. And it didn't concern me, it wasn't my case, but it was an issue that I thought about. If you're going to say that in your opening, and that's going to be part and parcel of your defense, an important part of your defense, how are you going to prove it? And of course, the defense doesn't have the burden of proof, but in a murder case, let's face it, you know, and especially in a case like this, it's tough. And you got to put your money where your mouth is. If you're going to do walk the walk, you talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. And I think that there was that was tough for them.
You know,
unless he took the stand.
I want to talk more about him not taking the stand, but we have to take a break. When we come back, let's break it down with our guests, and we'll talk more about this decision from the defense and was it a mistake or not. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Philip, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the things he's describing would have, I mean, it's him, we're first hearing it from the attorney. It's almost as if he's recounting what Nouman Raja would have testified to if he took the stand. But Raja chose not to take the stand. What do you think about that?
You know, Peter and I were discussing this in break. I think that he would have been torn apart, in particular by Miss Ellis. You remember just I was speaking about how, you know, this is a case I can just tell from the way she's litigating, she believes in it. So every discrepancy that he made within the reenactment would have been magnified to the utmost degree, right? Then he would have been tasked with trying to clean up the reenactment while he's on the stand, which would in and of itself have created a host of inconsistencies that she would have jumped all over, particularly with the fact that your memory clearly would have been more, you know, in tune with what happened a couple of hours after the event, as opposed to here we are, you know, close to a year or more, you know?
Right, and we all expected that he would take the stand, and he didn't, to explain some more of these details, and I will get Peter's reaction to that as well, but let's just play more of the defense's closing argument, and here is really trying to recount what happened in this shooting, but according to the defense's theory. Take a look.
He's driving east on PGA Boulevard, and he sees what appears to be an unoccupied vehicle on the side of the road. Now think about it. He's on an auto burglary detail. There's a big parking lot right next to that with cars in it, a DoubleTree Hotel parking lot. So he's going to check it out. He's going to see what's going on with the van. Maybe it's just a broken down motorist. Maybe it's somebody having a heart attack in the car. Who knows what it is? But he's going to check it out and see. He made a determination that the van was unoccupied. Well, why did he do that? There were no flashers on. The hood wasn't up. It was dark inside the car, and the driver's seat was reclined all the way back. What else do we know about what was going on in the van? There was a loaded handgun in the car, out of the box. How do we know it was out of the box? Well, first of all, there would have been no time for Mr. Jones to get it out of the box in the short amount of time that he had when the light shone on him. But second of all, you're listening to the AT&T tape. He's not rumbling through his belongings and getting something out of the glove box and opening a box. You don't hear any of that. So Mr. Jones had a handgun loaded on the front seat of his car or possibly on the center console when Officer Raja rolled up in his car.
Okay, so Peter, now again, it seems what the defense attorney is doing is suggesting details or the story, but without the testimony of the defendant. He didn't take the stand. What's your perspective on that?
Well, it opened in the opening. The same thing was discussed in the opening by the other lawyer who gave the opening, who was sitting at the defense table. I recognize him. It was the same thing. And, you know, they're not the witnesses. They're not sworn. And they did, you know, I think you need a theme of the case. You need a theory and a theme of the case. We know what the prosecution's theme of the case was. I never really got the theme of the defense case except to say, this is a fella who was an officer who was confronted with a situation. Everything was sudden. They were pointing Jones pointed a gun at him. He had to react quickly. And policemen every day don't know whether they're going to come home. So that seemed to be their theory from the opening. But, you know, you had that reenactment. And I guess he had no choice, Raja, but to do the reenactment under the police department rules. Otherwise, if he had counsel, he would have been nuts to do so. But be that as it may. So there was no real evidence. This wasn't a situation where they were trying, the theory of the case was a reasonable doubt. I didn't hear any of that in the closing. Yeah. They were just talking about their version of the facts. And it's not that they developed it in cross-examining or examining other witnesses. The only point that they were making was, you know, this laser business, right? Which I thought that was a throwaway issue.
Well, we're going to get more into that, and you made a really great point about them coming up with these details and the theory of it, and where did they get it ultimately from. We're going to play more of the defense's closing argument, but let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back here on the Law and Crime Network. Philip, I just want to go back to what we were hearing about this, the idea that if Raja could clearly be identified in that roadside assistance call saying, "I'm Officer Raja, are you okay?" this would have been an entirely different case, correct? Even if Jones had said, "Huh?" I mean, I'm just curious how this would have played out differently.
It's an entirely different case if it's clearly audible that he identified himself as an officer. Because here's the issue, Jesse. The issue as the defense is putting forth this case, this is a big weakness for them, is they're putting it on as if it is a traditional police shooting. I mean, I hate to say the word traditional these days, but as if it's an officer that's in uniform, as if there have been commands that have been given that would fit the fact that the officer is in uniform. Here we have a guy who was wearing shabby clothes, a Bass Pro hat, pulling up in an unmarked car. There is nothing about this interaction that says officer, right? Like objectively. So then we're left to believe that he identified himself in a way that we never heard.
Right.
And that I think in the sense that it doesn't fit the frame of like the officer involved shooting, that's why it would be different if we would have heard that he did identify himself.
Peter, we only have about 30 seconds. I want to ask you real quick, are you surprised the jury who found him guilty didn't take more of a fact, the idea that Jones was holding a loaded weapon?
You know, I don't know who was on the jury. I don't know the demographic. All I know is what I see every night on the damn news. And I see a police shooting of an unarmed or an armed African-American male. And I think that jurors see this and they either say, cops have a tough job, they're doing their job, they're doing the best they can, or here it is again.
Yep.
And I don't think that there's any way. I mean, the trial's the trial.
And it's not an easy case for the jury either which way. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about this trial and our new trial here on the Law and Crime Network.